The morning sun shone brightly over the city, filling the streets with golden light. It was a peaceful day and the air smelled fresh after a light drizzle. Sarah stood at the bus stop, clutching a small brown handbag close to her chest. She wore a plain cotton dress, neat but simple, and her hair was tied back in a loose bun. She wasn't the kind of woman who cared much about luxury or appearance. Her beauty was in her simplicity, in the kindness that lived behind her quiet smile. That day was special for her. For years, Sarah had dreamed of buying her own car. Not a fancy sports car or a luxury SUV, but something reliable, something that gave her independence. She had saved every extra penny from her part-time job at the local library, cutting down on small pleasures like new clothes or weekend treats. Every time she walked past a car showroom, she would stop for a moment, look through the glass and whisper to herself, "One day, I'll have one." That one day had finally arrived. Her husband David was successful and well off, but Sarah wanted this to be her achievement, something earned from her hard work and patience, not a gift. She wanted to feel the steering wheel under her hands and know that her efforts had brought her there. As she stepped off the bus and walked toward the car dealership, she felt both nervous and excited. The building looked grand and shiny, with tall glass windows and large posters of smiling people driving luxurious cars. The polished floor inside reflected the sunlight like a mirror, and every car seemed to glow under the bright showroom lights. Sarah took a deep breath and entered. The cool air conditioning hit her face, and she smiled softly as her eyes wandered from one car to another. Each one looked more beautiful than the last. Sleek designs, shining hoods, elegant interiors. For a moment, she imagined herself driving down a quiet road, the wind brushing through her hair, the radio playing her favorite old songs. She walked closer to a silver sedan parked in the center of the showroom. It wasn't the most expensive model, but it was just right for her. Simple, elegant, and practical. Her fingers gently brushed against its smooth surface. She could almost feel her dream coming true. But as she looked around, she noticed something strange. The salesman standing nearby didn't seem to pay her any attention. A few of them glanced at her quickly, then turned away. They were busy attending to other customers, people wearing expensive clothes, watches, and designer shoes. Sarah didn't mind at first. Maybe they were just busy. She decided to wait patiently. Minutes passed. She looked at the brochure, walked around the car, and even peeked inside the driver's seat window. Still, no one came to assist her. She smiled politely at one of the salesmen, hoping he'd notice her, but he quickly looked away. Another salesman walked right past her, greeting a couple that had just entered. A small feeling of unease began to rise inside her. Was it because of how she looked? She wondered. Her dress was clean but not stylish. Her shoes were worn from daily walks. Maybe they thought she couldn't afford the car. She bit her lip and took another deep breath. "It's okay," she whispered to herself. "Stay calm." Finally, she approached the reception desk. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was wondering if someone could help me with information about this model." The receptionist looked up, slightly surprised. "Oh, sure, ma'am. One of our salespeople will be with you shortly." Sarah nodded and went back to the car. She waited, still hopeful. In her heart, she was excited. She had dreamed of this for so long. Maybe she'd get to test drive it today. Maybe, just maybe, she would take her first drive in her very own car. A few minutes later, a tall man in a crisp shirt walked toward her. His name tag read Mark, sales executive. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Hello," she greeted cheerfully. "I really like this car. I was hoping to take a test drive." Mark looked at her from head to toe, his expression changing instantly. He gave a small fake smile. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "these cars are quite high-end. They're not for everyone." Sarah blinked, unsure what he meant. "Oh, I understand," she said gently. "But I've been saving up for a while. I'm really interested in this one." Mark chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Well, test drives are only for serious buyers, you know? We don't just hand over the keys to anyone." His tone was polite on the surface, but sharp underneath. Sarah felt her excitement fade into confusion. She didn't know how to respond. She had come in with such hope, and now she felt small and out of place. But instead of arguing, she simply nodded and smiled weakly. "I see, thank you," she whispered. She turned back toward the car and looked at it one last time. It was beautiful, and for a moment she imagined it again, hers. shining under the sunlight. She didn't know that destiny had other plans for her. Because the moment she was about to leave, the sound of polished shoes echoed across the floor. The glass doors opened and a familiar voice called her name. It was her husband, David, the man who owned the very dealership she was just humiliated in, and in that instant, everything was about to change. Sarah stood quietly beside the shiny silver car, still admiring its shape and gentle curves, trying not to let the sting of that salesman's tone get to her. The place was busy now, customers laughing, engines revving lightly as a few lucky ones got to test drive new models. The air smelled faintly of car polish and expensive perfume. She looked around again, hoping someone else might approach her with kindness, but no one did. The tall salesman, Mark, leaned against a nearby counter, scrolling through his phone. Every few seconds he would glance at Sarah and then smirk, as if she were out of place there. To him, she didn't belong among the glittering cars and wealthy buyers in designer suits. She was just an ordinary woman in a plain dress. Sarah didn't notice the smirk at first. Her heart was still filled with quiet hope. She walked slowly toward Mark, thinking maybe he'd misunderstood her earlier. Maybe she just had to show genuine interest. She smiled softly and said, "Sir, I really do like this car. I was hoping you could tell me more about its features." Mark put down his phone lazily and crossed his arms. "This one," he said, nodding toward the car as if it was too good for her. "It's one of our premium models. It's not really affordable for everyone. Maybe you'd prefer something smaller." Sarah's smile faded just a little. "No, this one is fine," she replied gently. "I've done my research. I think this car suits my needs perfectly." Her tone was calm, polite. But Mark wasn't really listening. He was too busy judging her simple clothes and the worn strap of her handbag. He let out a small laugh and said, "Ma'am, the people who usually buy this model come with, proper background checks or referrals. It's not just about money, it's about being the right kind of customer." The words hit Sarah like a quiet slap. She blinked, unsure how to respond. "The right kind of customer?" she repeated softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," Mark continued casually, shrugging. "People who are serious about buying, not just browsing." Sarah took a deep breath. She had been nothing but respectful, but now her throat tightened. "I am serious," she said quietly. "I've been saving for this for years. I just want to take a short test drive." Mark looked at her with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Test drives aren't for everyone, ma'am. We have to make sure we don't waste time or resources." The words echoed in her mind. Waste time or resources. Sarah stood there frozen for a moment. The light from the showroom windows reflected on her face, showing the hint of hurt in her eyes. Other customers nearby had begun to notice. One couple glanced in her direction, whispering something under their breath. Another salesman chuckled quietly as if it were some kind of joke. Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She tried to swallow the lump forming in her throat. "I didn't mean to waste anyone's time," she said softly. "I just thought—" Before she could finish, Mark interrupted. "Ma'am, please. Let's not make this uncomfortable. Maybe you can visit one of the smaller dealerships down the road. They have cars that might fit your budget better." He said it with such fake kindness that it sounded worse than rudeness. For a moment, Sarah stood completely still. The noise of the showroom faded. The conversations, the laughter, the sound of heels clicking on the floor. All of it became a blur. All she could hear was the steady pounding of her heart. She looked down at the car again. It was so close yet suddenly felt unreachable. She had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it felt ruined by the cruelty of someone who didn't even know her story. Still, she didn't want to cause a scene. She had too much dignity for that. With quiet grace, she nodded. "Thank you for your time," she said softly, forcing a polite smile. "I'll think about it." Then she turned away. As she walked toward the door, her footsteps felt heavy. Her dream car stayed behind her, shining like a reminder of the wall between dreams and reality. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded paper. It was her savings record, handwritten neatly, showing every deposit she'd made over the years. She had worked so hard for this moment, and yet in a few cruel words it had all been taken away. Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "Don't cry here, Sarah," she told herself. "Not in front of them." She lifted her chin, took a deep breath, and prepared to leave. But just as she reached the exit, A sudden silence filled the room. The sound of the glass doors opening broke the air like a drumbeat. A man in a tailored black suit stepped inside, tall, confident, and calm. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor as he walked in with an air of quiet authority. The staff instantly straightened their postures. "Good morning, sir," they greeted with sudden politeness. Mark's face turned pale as he hurriedly tucked his phone into his pocket. Sarah froze mid-step. She knew that voice, that walk. That calm strength in his eyes. It was David, her husband, the owner of the very dealership where she had just been humiliated. And though she hadn't said a single word to him yet, he could already see from her trembling hands and sad eyes that something was very wrong. He looked at her for just 1 second, then turned his gaze slowly toward Mark. The room went silent again. The temperature felt colder. What came next would change not only that moment, but the lesson everyone in that dealership would remember forever. Sarah stood frozen near the door as her husband, David, stepped inside the dealership. His calm, confident presence filled the entire space like a wave of quiet authority. Every head turned. The staff who had ignored her moments ago now looked alert, straightening their ties and standing tall as if the world had suddenly changed in an instant. David had that kind of presence, the kind that made people stop talking and start paying attention. His reputation as a kind but firm businessman was well known in the city. He didn't flaunt his success, but everyone respected him. He was the kind of man who treated a janitor and a CEO with the same level of respect. That's why Sarah had fallen in love with him years ago, for his humility, not his wealth. But at that moment, none of the employees realized who the simple woman standing near the exit really was. To them, she was just another customer who didn't belong in a place full of shiny cars and bigger wallets. David smiled politely as he walked past the front desk, greeting a few people on his way. "Good morning, everyone," he said casually. "Busy day, I see." The employees nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir, very busy," one of them said, pretending to be focused on a file that had been lying untouched all morning. David's eyes scanned the room. Then they stopped, right at Sarah. She was standing near the glass doors, her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag nervously. Her eyes were red, though she tried hard to hide it. "Sarah?" he called softly. She looked up, startled. "Oh, hi," she whispered. Her voice was gentle but shaky. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. David's brow furrowed. "What are you doing here, love?" "You didn't tell me you were coming." Before she could answer, Mark, the same salesman who had humiliated her, hurried over with a forced grin. "Good morning, sir. Welcome back. I didn't know you were visiting today." David nodded slightly, still keeping his eyes on Sarah. "Just wanted to check in. Everything all right here?" Mark laughed nervously. "Of course. Everything's perfect, sir. Just a regular day. We've had some interesting visitors, too." Sarah lowered her head, feeling the heat of embarrassment rise to her face. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want David to know she had been insulted. But her silence spoke louder than any words. David gently walked toward her, ignoring the confused looks around him. "Sweetheart, is something wrong?" he asked softly. Sarah opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Mark stepped in, trying to control the situation. "Oh no, sir. Nothing wrong at all. This lady, was just asking about a car. But, it's one of our higher-end models, so I explained the process." David turned his gaze to Mark slowly. "Explained the process?" His tone was calm, but there was a sharpness hidden beneath it. "Yes, sir," Mark continued quickly, laughing awkwardly. "She wanted a test drive, but as per our policy, we reserve test drives for serious clients. I didn't want to waste your team's time." The entire room went quiet. Every employee froze. Sarah felt her heart drop. She wished she could disappear. This was the last thing she wanted, to be the reason her husband got angry or disappointed in anyone. David's expression didn't change much, but his eyes, those calm, steady eyes, grew cold. He turned slightly, looking at Sarah again. "You asked for a test drive?" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did. But it's fine, really. He didn't mean anything." David took a slow breath, then looked around the room. "Does anyone here know who my wife is?" You could hear a pin drop. Mark blinked, his smile vanishing instantly. "Your wife?" he stuttered. His voice cracked and his confidence vanished as fast as his color. "Yes, David said firmly, placing a hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. "This simple woman you refuse to help is my wife, Sarah." The shock that rippled through the room was almost visible. A few employees looked down, embarrassed. Others glanced at each other, wide-eyed. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm tone carried more weight than shouting ever could. "You judged her based on how she looked. You assumed she couldn't afford what she came for. You made her feel small in a place that's supposed to welcome everyone." Mark swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I didn't realize." "That's the problem," David interrupted quietly. "You didn't even try to realize." Sarah stood silently beside him, her heart pounding. She wasn't angry anymore, just deeply saddened by how easily people forget that respect should never depend on appearance or money. David sighed and turned back to his wife. His expression softened. "You didn't deserve that love," he said gently. Sarah smiled faintly. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm fine," but David knew she wasn't fine. He could see the pain behind her calmness, the quiet embarrassment that no apology could erase. He looked back at the staff and said, "Let this be a reminder. In my dealership, everyone who walks through those doors deserves respect. Whether they look rich or poor, whether they come in suits or slippers, they all deserve kindness." Then he turned back to Sarah and said softly, "Come, let's take that test drive." Sarah hesitated. "Really?" David smiled. "Yes, you've waited long enough." And as he led her toward the car, the same one she'd admired so dearly, every pair of eyes in that showroom followed her, not with judgment this time, but with quiet shame and awe. Sarah didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. Her dignity, her patience, and her quiet grace had spoken louder than any argument ever could. The sound of the car keys clinking softly in David's hand echoed through the quiet showroom. Everyone stood frozen, still processing what had just happened. The same staff who once ignored Sarah were now too stunned to meet her eyes. Moments ago, she had been a simple woman. Now they realized she was the wife of the man who owned the entire dealership. Sarah, however, didn't carry the pride or satisfaction one might expect. Her face was calm, her voice soft. She didn't want revenge, she only wanted to leave quietly. Yet David had other plans. He led her toward the silver car she had admired earlier, the one that had captured her heart the moment she walked in. "This one, right?" he asked gently, his voice low but warm. Sarah nodded, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. "Yes, this one," she said, her eyes glistening slightly. David smiled faintly. "Then this is the one you'll drive." Mark, the salesman, shifted uncomfortably nearby. His face was pale, his confidence completely gone. He fumbled with his notepad, trying to find words. "Sir, I didn't know." "If I had known she was your wife." David turned toward him slowly. "That's the point," he said. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect." The words hung in the air like truth carved into stone. No one dared to move or speak. Sarah looked up at David. Her heart was filled with mixed emotions, gratitude, love, and a touch of sadness.
She didn't want this scene.
She never wanted people to bow down to her because of her husband's name. What she wanted was simple, just a little kindness, a little decency. Still, as she stood beside him, she couldn't help but feel proud. Not because her husband owned the dealership, but because he understood what respect truly meant. David motioned toward the car. "Get in," he said with a soft smile. "Let's see how it feels." Sarah hesitated. "Now, after everything?" "Especially now," he replied. "You came here with hope. Let's end this day the way it should have started." With a deep breath, she opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather felt soft beneath her hands. Her reflection in the mirror looked different somehow, stronger, more confident. She pressed her palms against the steering wheel, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to truly smile. David leaned in through the open window. "You look perfect there," he said warmly. Mark cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, should I, prepare the paperwork?" David didn't look at him. "No need for that right now," he said. "First, she drives." He stepped back and nodded toward the showroom doors. "Open them." The staff hurried to obey. The large glass doors slid apart slowly, letting in the fresh afternoon air. Sunlight spilled across the floor, reflecting off the polished car like a spotlight from heaven. Sarah turned the key, and the engine roared softly to life. A smooth, elegant hum that made her heart race. She gripped the wheel tighter. This wasn't just a car anymore, it was a symbol of something she had longed for. Freedom, recognition, and self-worth. David stood a few steps away, watching her with pride. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke for him. As she carefully drove the car forward, everyone in the showroom stepped aside, their faces a mixture of awe and guilt. Some whispered apologies under their breath, though Sarah didn't hear them. She was focused on the road ahead, the way the sunlight reflected off the hood, and the simple joy of being behind the wheel. Once outside, the gentle breeze brushed against her face. She slowed down, parked for a moment, and looked at David, who had followed her out. He smiled and opened the passenger door, getting in beside her. "Do you remember what you said when we first started dreaming about our future?" he asked, fastening his seatbelt. Sarah chuckled softly. "I said I wanted to drive one day, to go wherever I wanted without waiting for anyone. And now?" he asked. She looked ahead, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "Now I finally can." David nodded, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "You earned this, not because of me, but because of who you are. Don't ever forget that." For a moment they sat there silently, surrounded by the soft hum of the engine and the warmth of the afternoon sun. Inside the showroom, everyone watched through the glass. No one spoke. No one laughed. They had all learned something valuable that day, something no training manual or sales meeting could ever teach. Mark stood near the entrance, regret etched on his face. He realized that the woman he had judged so quickly had more strength and grace than anyone he'd ever met. He would carry that shame with him for a long time, but perhaps it would make him better. As Sarah and David drove slowly down the street, she felt a lightness in her chest. Not because she was sitting in a luxury car, but because she had stood tall through humiliation and walked away with dignity intact. David glanced at her and said quietly, "Sometimes people need to see who we really are to remember who they should be." Sarah smiled, looking out the window as the city passed by. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I hope they learn to see everyone that way, even when they don't know who they are." David reached over and held her hand as they drove on, the car gliding smoothly down the road. The dealership behind them shimmered in the distance, not as a place of business anymore, but as a reminder, a silent lesson about humility, respect, and the power of quiet strength. The warm afternoon sun slowly faded into a soft orange glow as Sarah and David returned to the dealership. The short drive had filled Sarah's heart with something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The wind in her hair, the sound of the engine, and the steady presence of her husband beside her made her feel whole again. But as the car came to a stop in front of the showroom, she could sense the tension waiting for them inside. The staff stood silently near the entrance. Some pretended to organize papers, others adjusted their ties nervously. The atmosphere was heavy, like a classroom waiting for a teacher after a fight. Sarah could feel all their eyes on her, but she didn't look away. She opened the door slowly and stepped out, calm and graceful as if nothing had happened. David followed her, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry, but there was a quiet firmness in his eyes that made everyone uncomfortable. He wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Mark, the salesman who had refused Sarah earlier, took a hesitant step forward. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, I truly didn't mean any harm. I just thought—" David lifted his hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's right, Mark, you thought," he said quietly. "You thought she didn't belong here. You thought she wasn't good enough for the cars you sell. You thought judging her by her appearance was acceptable." Mark's lips parted, but no words came out. His throat felt dry, his pride shattered. He looked at Sarah with genuine remorse. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." "I didn't recognize," Sarah interrupted softly. "It's not about recognizing me. You shouldn't have to know someone's name to show respect." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it pierced deeper than anger ever could. The other employees shifted uncomfortably. They could feel the truth of her words pressing on their hearts. David looked around the room. "Every person who walks through these doors is a customer," he said calmly. "Whether they arrive in a limousine or on foot, they deserve the same welcome, the same smile, the same respect." A few nodded quietly, their faces full of guilt. Sarah turned slightly, her eyes soft but strong. When I came in earlier, I was excited, she said. I didn't come here expecting special treatment. I just wanted to buy a car with my own savings. But instead I was made to feel like I didn't belong. Her voice quivered slightly, but she didn't stop. Do you know what that feels like? To walk into a place with hope and walk out feeling smaller than you came in? No one answered. The silence was thick, heavy with shame. Even Mark couldn't meet her gaze anymore. David stepped closer to his wife, his tone gentle now. Sarah, I'm proud of you, he said. You didn't shout. You didn't argue. You stayed calm even when someone tried to make you feel less. That takes strength. Sarah smiled faintly. I wasn't angry, David, just disappointed. Her words hung in the air like a quiet echo. They weren't meant to hurt, but they did. Because everyone there knew she was right. David turned back to the team. Let this moment be a reminder. This place doesn't run on money. It runs on trust, reputation, and humanity. And if we forget that, we lose everything that matters. He looked at Mark again, his expression softer now. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is whether you learn from them. Mark nodded quickly, his voice barely a whisper. I'll remember this, sir. I promise. David sighed and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Good. Then make sure this never happens to anyone again. Sarah, who had stayed quiet, suddenly smiled and said, Maybe you can help someone else next time. Someone who walks in with the same nervous smile I had today. Mark nodded again, this time with sincerity. I will, ma'am. I truly will. The mood in the room began to shift. The tension started to melt away, replaced by reflection and quiet respect. What had begun as a moment of humiliation was now turning into a powerful lesson, for everyone. David turned to Sarah and said softly, You know, love, you've done more for this place today than any training session ever could. She chuckled lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't plan to teach anyone a lesson. I just wanted to test drive a car. David smiled, his eyes warm with affection. And you did, beautifully. As they walked toward the exit together, the employees followed them with their eyes, not out of curiosity this time, but admiration. They had seen grace under pressure, dignity in silence, and strength in kindness. When they stepped outside, the air felt lighter, as if the building itself had taken a breath of humility. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. Sarah looked at the car once more, then at her husband. You know, she said thoughtfully, sometimes life tests us before it rewards us. David smiled. And you passed that test better than anyone I know. They stood there for a moment, watching the sky fade into twilight. Inside the showroom, the staff began to move again, but this time with purpose. They greeted every person who entered with genuine warmth. They didn't see clothes or status anymore. They saw people. Sarah had changed the atmosphere without shouting, without demanding anything. She had simply shown them what quiet strength looked like. As David and Sarah walked hand in hand toward their car, the world around them seemed just a little kinder than before. The next morning, the air in the dealership felt different. It was quieter, softer, like the building itself remembered what had happened the day before. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by a kind of thoughtful silence. Everyone moved more carefully, spoke more politely, and greeted each customer with genuine smiles. Sarah and David hadn't planned to visit again, but fate had its own plans. David received a message from his manager asking if he could stop by for a short meeting. Sarah came along, though she hesitated at first. Are you sure it's okay for me to come? She asked as they drove. David smiled warmly. You belong there more than anyone else, love. When they arrived, the staff immediately straightened up. Mark, the salesman who had once spoken to Sarah so harshly, was standing near the entrance. The moment he saw her, his eyes softened. He walked up slowly, not with fear this time, but with genuine respect. Good morning, ma'am, he said quietly. I wanted to thank you, and apologize again. Yesterday opened my eyes. Sarah smiled kindly. That means a lot, Mark, thank you. He hesitated before continuing. I've worked here for 5 years and I thought I understood people. But I realize now I only looked at faces, clothes, and wallets, not hearts. You taught me something I should have learned long ago. Sarah nodded gently. We all learn when we're ready. What matters is what you do with that lesson. Her words weren't grand or complicated, just simple truth spoken with grace. David watched quietly, his eyes filled with pride. He knew this moment wasn't about him. It was about her. the woman who had handled humiliation with dignity and turned it into wisdom. Inside the meeting room, David spoke with his team while Sarah waited near the cars. She watched as new customers walked in, a young couple, an old man with his grandson, a woman in a simple sari who looked nervous, just as Sarah had the day before. The woman looked startled but smiled back. "I just wanted to ask about this car, but I'm not sure I can afford it." Mark chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Ma'am, don't worry about that right now. Let's just take a look. Everyone deserves to know what they like." Sarah's heart swelled as she watched. The tone, the warmth, it was genuine. The same man who once turned her away was now treating another woman with kindness. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not pride, but change. When David came out, he saw the same scene and smiled. "Seems the lesson stuck," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Sometimes people just need to be reminded that kindness isn't a rule. It's a choice." David slipped his arm around her shoulder. "You've reminded everyone of that." Just then, the woman in the sari looked over at Sarah and smiled. She didn't know who Sarah was or what had happened yesterday, but somehow, their eyes met in a quiet understanding. Two women who had once felt small but chose to stand tall. Later that day, David gathered the staff together for a brief talk. "I'm not here to scold anyone," he began. "We all make mistakes. But I want everyone here to understand one thing. This dealership isn't just about selling cars. It's about trust, respect, and humanity." He paused for a moment and looked at Sarah, who was standing quietly beside him. "Yesterday, my wife reminded me, and all of us, what humility really means. It's not about lowering yourself. It's about raising others." Everyone listened intently. Mark lowered his eyes, tears forming. Others nodded, their faces thoughtful. David continued. "A company only grows when its people grow, not just in skill, but in heart. From today, I want every customer who walks in to leave with a smile, whether they buy something or not." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't meant to become the reason for all this change, but maybe this was exactly what was supposed to happen. Maybe sometimes life uses small moments of pain to teach big lessons. After the meeting, one of the junior employees, a young woman named Alicia, approached Sarah. "Ma'am," she said shyly, "I just wanted to tell you. I look up to you now. Yesterday, when I saw how you handled everything, it made me think. I've faced rude people too, and I always get angry. But you stayed calm. You made them see their mistake without shouting." Sarah smiled softly and touched her shoulder. "Anger burns fast, Alicia, but grace lasts longer. When you choose kindness, it changes more than words ever can." Alicia nodded, her eyes shining. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll remember that." By the time Sarah and David left the dealership that day, something had changed, not just in the people but in the very air of the place. It felt warmer, more human. The staff greeted each new visitor with sincerity, not performance. As Sarah got into the car, she looked back one last time. She saw Mark holding the door open for an elderly man, smiling genuinely, offering him tea while he waited. She turned to David with a small smile. "Looks like humility found its home here." David chuckled softly. "All thanks to a simple woman who refused to be treated as less." Sarah laughed lightly. "A simple woman who just wanted a test drive." They both smiled as the car rolled out of the parking lot, the golden sunlight wrapping around them like a blessing. Behind them, the dealership stood tall, not just as a business, but as a reminder that real success begins with humility and ends with respect. The golden evening sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange, pink, and soft purple. Sarah sat quietly in the passenger seat as David drove down the familiar road that led to their home. The hum of the car engine blended with the gentle rhythm of her thoughts. The events of the past 2 days played in her mind like a movie. The humiliation, the shock, the silence, and finally, the change. But strangely, she didn't feel bitterness anymore. What remained was peace. A deep, calm peace that comes when you know something good has come out of something painful. David glanced at her and smiled. "You're quiet," he said softly. Sarah turned to him, her lips curling into a small smile. "Just thinking," she said. "It's strange, isn't it? How one small moment can change so much." David nodded. "Sometimes it only takes one person to remind others what really matters." Sarah looked out the window, watching children play by the roadside, laughing freely. "I didn't plan to teach anyone anything," she said. "I just wanted to buy a car. But maybe, Life planned it for me, David smiled. That's how change works, love. It doesn't always come from speeches or big actions. Sometimes it comes from quiet people doing the right thing. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. When they reached home, Sarah got out of the car and looked back at it with a warm smile. That silver car was no longer just a vehicle. It was a symbol of dignity, patience, and the quiet strength she didn't know she had. Later that night, as they sat together on the porch with cups of tea in their hands, David turned to her and said, "You know, everyone at the dealership is still talking about you." Sarah raised an eyebrow playfully. "About me? I hope it's something nice this time." David chuckled. "Oh, it is. They said you made them see things differently. Even Mark came to me again today. He's been helping new staff learn how to treat customers better. He said your words changed him." Sarah's eyes softened. "That's all I wanted. Not to embarrass anyone, just to make them think." David nodded slowly. "You did more than that. You made them feel? That's rare." Sarah sipped her tea, her gaze drifting toward the stars. The night sky sparkled with quiet grace, just like her heart. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "it's funny how people think being simple means being weak. But sometimes, simplicity is the greatest strength of all." David smiled. "Because simple people don't need to prove anything. They just live with honesty, and that's powerful." A soft breeze passed, rustling the leaves, carrying away the heaviness that once filled her heart. In the days that followed, news of what had happened in the dealership began to spread, not as gossip but as a story that touched hearts. Customers started noticing the difference. The staff was kinder, more patient, and more respectful. People left not only with cars but with smiles. Some even asked, "Is it true? Was there really a woman who was refused a test drive and turned out to be the owner's wife?" And every time the answer came with a smile and a story. "Yes," they would say, but she didn't get angry or shout. She taught us something instead. Sarah became a quiet symbol in that community, a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly but leaves an echo that lasts forever. One morning, a letter arrived at their home. It was from Mark. Inside was a simple note written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Sarah, I just wanted to say thank you. You probably don't know how much that day changed me. I've started volunteering at a community center, helping people learn about financial planning. I guess I wanted to make up for judging others too quickly. You taught me that respect is free and everyone deserves it. Sincerely, Mark." Sarah read the letter silently, her eyes filling with tears. She handed it to David, who smiled softly after reading it. "Looks like your lesson reached further than the dealership," he said. Sarah laughed, gently wiping her eyes. "I didn't teach a lesson, David. Life did. I just happened to be there." He reached for her hand and held it. "No," he said with a smile. "Life needed someone strong enough to live that lesson. That was you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the morning sun streamed through the window. Sometimes, the world doesn't change through grand acts of power. It changes through moments of grace. A woman who stayed calm when others mocked her. A husband who stood by her side not with anger but with quiet pride. A mistake that became a mirror for humility. Sarah's story wasn't just about a test drive. It was about life's biggest test. How we treat others when we think no one is watching. And as the days turned into weeks, that story continued to spread, whispered in showrooms, shared at dinner tables, and told by those who needed a little reminder that decency and respect never go out of style. Sarah never sought fame or recognition. She didn't need it, because she already had the greatest reward, knowing she changed hearts without raising her voice. Sometimes the simplest woman can drive the biggest change,